Hi, this is William from Great Affordable Watches, and today I'm gonna go through some watches I think is either overpriced or overrated. And as always with this type of discussions, this is just my opinion, and the watches in this list is only watches I think is very overpriced while being very popular and very famous. So there are many watchmakers, for like U-Boat for example, that makes extremely overpriced watches, but those brands are not as popular or famous as the brands in this list. So yeah, of course there are many overpriced watches, but I can't include them all, so I have chosen to include just a few of them, which is very popular while being overpriced in my opinion. So let's get to it. We're gonna start off with a pretty infamous watch, and that's the Tag Heuer Aqua Racer. And this watch retails for about $2,000 plus minus. And Tag Heuer is a pretty interesting brand overall, and before Tag acquired Heuer was a very respected brand, and they made some of the best looking watches in the history, and many of their Heuer watches are very well respected and high regarded, and they are often collector's items. So they made some amazing watches, and some of Tag Heuer's watches today are very good as well, but many people hate on them because they produce some pretty uninteresting models and maybe some very ugly watches, and especially the Aqua Racer is a great example of a pretty boring and plain watch that costs around $1,000 too much, because this watch uses the Tag Heuer Caliber 5, which is basically an ETA 2824, which you can find in watches for about $400 give or take. And the build quality and finish is not that good. Of course it's decent, but it's not that good. And I think many people buy this watch because of the name, the brand, and but many watch enthusiasts think that this watch is just overpriced. And you can get the Christopher Ward C60 Trident, which is basically a similar looking watch with the build quality that is on par with the Aqua Racer for about maybe over $1,000 less than the Aqua Racer. So I would not buy the Aqua Racer, but if you think the styling is right and you can get a very good price on it, yeah, maybe you should, and you could pick it up. Another brand that is, in my opinion, pretty overpriced, and that's the Bell & Ross. And many of their watches, I don't know if perhaps all of their watches uses the ETA 2892 movement, which they say they have adjusted and all that, but that's basically the standard 2892, and for a watch for about $3,000, I think getting a standard ETA 2892, that's not really something great. And I think many people think that for this kind of money you can get something great, something more with a much better movement, etc. And but of course the styling is unique, and I think this is one of the only watches with this kind of styling, so that's nice. And they make some nice chronographs, but they are overpriced in my opinion as well. But I think for a watch at this price point, you should get an in-house movement or something more exciting, in my opinion. I think many people don't really care about in-house movements or movements overall, and maybe you should say, yeah, the ETA is a very good movement, very accurate if you adjust it correctly. But for me, having an ETA movement in a very expensive watch. It's like buying a Ferrari with a Volvo engine or a BMW engine. Yeah, they are BMW or Volvo, they make great engines, but you're buying a Ferrari not only because of the looks, but also the engine in the car. So having a ETA is like, for me at least, having a Volvo engine in a more expensive chassis. And I think Bell & Ross uses ETA in all of their watches. Maybe some watches are in-house, I don't really know, so don't quote me on this, but the most popular models use the ETA 2892. Another brand, which is, or I should say, another very popular watch, is the Cartier Santos 100 and 100 XL, etc. And this watch retails for about $6,000 or more, I think. And this watch also uses the ETA 2892, and I think a watch for $6,000 or more should have an in-house movement. And for me, it feels wrong to buy watch this expensive and getting a ETA 2892, which you can get in watches for under $1,000. You can get Hamilton watches with 2892 for about $600, and for me it feels wrong to buy a expensive watch like this with such a movement. As I said before, it's not a bad movement, it's just pretty unexciting for me. And I think Cartier as a brand, they make some very good looking watches, and the Santos especially, I think it's a pretty interesting looking watch, and they got the brand history and all that, which is very respected, of course, but I think they should put some effort in and make an in-house movement and put that in-house movement in most of their watches. And a very infamous brand which is extremely expensive, and that is Hublot. Maybe I didn't pronounce that correctly, but you all know which watch this is or which brand this is. And the Classic Fusion for me is just a extremely overpriced watch, and it's basically a rip-off of AP watches, the AP Royal Oak. And Hublot as a brand haven't really offered anything to the watchmaking industry and the watchmaking history overall. And this watch also comes with a ETA. I think it's a ETA 2824 or ETA 2892. I'm a bit unsure of this, but I think it's the 2892, and it's a same here. This watch goes for about $8,000 or more, and getting a ETA in a watch like this, yeah, it's bad. And this brand is also very popular, and they're selling a lot of watches, I guess. And so it's pretty bad to see that they are still offering ETA movements in their watches. And not all the movements, as I said, there are a copy of the AP and all that. So, and this is a pretty infamous brand overall. So yeah. The next watches I think is Overpriced is actually a specific category of watches that have the ETA 7750 chronograph movement, which is a fantastic movement overall. And as we all know, chronographs are a bit more expensive than regular automatic watches without a chronograph complication. So you can get this movement in watches from about $600 and up, and some watch manufacturers offer this with this movement in watches up to $2,000, $3,000 and even more, as I'm gonna get into later. And I think, yeah, maybe $3,000 for a ball chronograph is not really that bad, but I think when you're looking for a chronograph with or I should say an automatic chronograph, I think you should really do your research, because some manufacturers tend to take a bit too much for their ETA 7750 chronograph watches. And I know Baume Mercier have a lot of watches, chronographs with the 7750 movement, and they take between $2,000 to $3,000 for those watches, and you can get most Tissot or Hamilton chronos for around $1,000 or less, with the same movement and all that. And I know Steinhardt offers a chronograph, a bronze marine chronograph with a top grade 7750 movement for about €1,000. And I think some of the watches, like I said, Ball, Baume Mercier, etc., take a bit too much, but they are still great watches, and if you like the look, yeah, you could buy one. But remember that you can buy a Speedmaster Professional with an in-house movement for around that price. So there are in-house movements, chronographs with in-house movements and more interesting movements overall in this price range. So do your research when you are intending to buy a automatic chrono. If we continue with the 7750 movement line, IWC Portuguese chronographs often comes with a 7750 movement, and they go for about, I think the cheapest one I've seen, a white Portuguese chrono, is around $55,500, and we all love IWC. They make fantastic watches, but I think some of the chronograph watches they make and have the ETA 7750 is a bit, I don't know, I think it's a bit bad of them, because they have in-house movements, which is fantastic of course, and I think it's a pretty bad of them to actually cheapen out and having such ETA movements or the 7750 movement in such high-end watches. And yeah, they should switch out to their in-house movements instead of using them. And the Portuguese is a very popular watch, and it looks fantastic, and it's almost a classic design, famous classic design, and for me it's a bit of shame for them to using that movement. It's a good movement of course, but I would never buy a Portuguese as long as I got the 7750. I can't really shake the feeling that I could have gotten a much cheaper watch with the same movement, and that feeling for me is a bit too much, so I wouldn't buy a Portuguese with the ETA 7750 movement. Other IWC watches like the Aqua Timer Automatic uses the ETA 2892 movement, and the Portofino also uses the same movement as the Aqua Timer, and same here, I think for $4,000 and above, and $5,000, around $5,000 for a Aqua Timer with a bracelet. I think that's just too much for as I've been saying throughout the video, that's just too much for ETA, a watch with the ETA movement. I think it's a bad business, honestly, to have a mass-produced ETA regular standard movement in watches like this. And yeah, the Aqua Timer is a great looking watch, and the build quality is of course typical IWC, very good as well, very good of course. So it's a shame they're using ETA's mass-produced movement, because they can make great in-house movements of course. And the same can also be said about the Tudor Black Bay when it first released a few years ago. It came with the ETA 2824 top grade movement, which is, as I said, it's a very good movement, but you can get watches with that movement for, as I said, around $300 to $400. But the design on the Tudor Black Bay, especially the black one, is probably one of my absolute favorite watch designs, and I really love the vintage inspired look. But because it had the ETA 2824 movement, that was a deal breaker for me. So some people agree with me on this but now luckily they have changed the movement to an in-house movement, and I don't think they have increased the price that much. And for me this is just amazing because the design is fantastic. The design was fantastic, but the movement was a bit boring, and it was for me overpriced because of that movement. But now when they have an in-house movement, I think the new Black Bay is just a fantastic watch, and it's one of the better affordable watches in this price range, and for me it offers a lot of value, even though it's a very expensive watch, of course. So for me, if some of these watches would switch from the ETA to an in-house movement, I think for me they would become much more relevant than they are right now. Because even though I love the look of the Tudor Black Bay, I couldn't really get myself to spend that kind of money with on a watch with that movement. So yeah, and remember, this was just my opinion, and of course your opinion may differ from mine, but thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And as I said in my last video, the Q&A video will be up in maybe 1 or 2 weeks, maybe 1 week from now. So stay tuned for that, and I hope I see you in the next one.